Good evening. My name is Eric Dixon and I'm the chairman of the Muriel Spark Society. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you all from all over the world. I've just been hearing about our attendees from Brazil to India, China and Italy today. So a warm welcome to everybody. Today we're celebrating two very special anniversaries. The first one is our society is 20 years old this year, and we were founded by Christine Lloyd with Dame Muriel's own blessing back in 2001. So it's been a great 20 years, and thank you, Christine. And the second one, and the one that we're going to focus on during the talk this evening, is on the publication of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which was published on the 5th of October 1961 by Macmillan in London. So to this very day, 60 years ago. So it's a nice celebration for us in the society, and I hope for many of you too. The novel would later be published in its entirety in the New Yorker magazine later in October in America in 1961 too. So that was a big unique tribute for it as well. So these are the two anniversaries, and I was putting together what we were going to do to mark it, and I heard about this wonderful book by Norma Allan called Hats and Blue Stockings, which is a kind of social history of the great school of James Gillespie's that Norma attended in the 50s and Muriel Spark attended in the 1930s, and where we get Miss K as well. So we're looking forward to this talk. There's going to be a very rich talk full of memories and ideas, I'm sure, and I hope that you enjoy it. During the talk, you'll be able to type in questions. If you look at the bottom of your screens, I think you'll be able to do it then, and there will be a little Q&A at the end of the talk as well. So do save up some questions, or if you think of any during the talk, that would be absolutely fine. I'm just thinking of anything else I need to mention. Just enjoy it and enjoy Jean Brodie. As you know, she's become a bit of a myth with Oscars and Tony Awards and all sorts of things as well. But the main thing is this wonderful book, which I've been rereading on this very autumnal day in Edinburgh. So I do hope that you enjoy it. And over to you, Norma.
Well, thank you, Eric, for your introduction, and good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to members of the Muriel Spark Society, and to all those Gillespie girls out there who may be listening in today, wherever you are in the world. After our lockdown year, it feels very strange to be finally speaking to you after so much delay. I am sure you are all disappointed not to be able to meet in person. During 2020, the idea of the talk became increasingly unreal, and it seemed to me as if it would never actually happen. I had hoped to address you in person in the boardroom of the NLS, but sadly, this was not possible. What is worth noting, however, as Eric has already mentioned, is that the date and title of today's lecture was chosen because it is actually this very day, 60 years ago, the 60th anniversary of the publication of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Muriel Spark's most famous novel, on the 5th of October, 1961. I will begin with a brief description of myself. Then I will talk about my book, Hats and Blue Stockings, before going on to the subject of this lecture, celebrating 60 years of Miss Jean Brodie. I am, of course, a Gillespie girl from the 1950s, during the golden era of Gillespie's, when it was a girls' school of high academic standard and reputation. Muriel Spark attended the same school in the 1930s, in the same school building on the links. I went on to Edinburgh University before heading for the bright lights of London, where I spent many years teaching and enjoying the culture of London life. Later, I moved to the States, returning to Edinburgh around 1980. On my return, I lived for many years at 160 Brunsfield Place, 2 floors above Muriel Spark's childhood home, where her son Robin lived until his death. The path she took daily to Gillespie's on the links is now called the Muriel Spark Walk. In Edinburgh, I was a teacher for many years and later trained as a Blue Badge Guide, Scottish tourist guide. I have enjoyed writing for most of my adult life, and my publications to date include 10 poetry pamphlets, a biography of my mother, a compilation of the works of an Edinburgh folk singer, Bob Bertram, and of course, Box Hats and Blue Stockings, my book on Gillespies and my most successful publication so far. I have two more poetry collections on the on the file, one on geology and another humorous poems on old age. 2018 was the centenary year of Muriel Spark's birth, 1918, and various events and exhibitions took place about her life and work. To mark the occasion, new editions of her novels were published, and the NLS hosted an exhibition to which she had donated many documents and personal items. That same year, I was returning home to our flat at 160 Brunsfield Place, and there in the stairwell was Kirsty Wark, the BBC presenter, filming a documentary on Muriel Spark's early life. I greeted her like a long-lost friend, though I don't actually know her, and I invited her to film the back green from our bedroom window for use in the film. The camera operator was a woman. Muriel would have approved of that, I suspect. I am addressing you today as the writer of my book about Gillespies, Box Hats and Blue Stockings, which was published in 2019. It is not about the Gillespies of today, but about the golden age of Gillespies when it was a girls' school of high educational standards. Over the years, the girls' school has commanded great loyalty and love among its alumni. I will quote you a paragraph from the introduction of my book, which summarizes it well. To me and many, this is from my book, to me and many others who experienced James Gillespie's High School for Girls in the pre- and post-war years, it was a time when academic standards were at their highest and most rigorous. Yes, it was a form of elitism, but elitism of academic ability, not of class or money. Because of this excellent education provided by the school, Gillespies enjoyed a unique reputation nationwide, and though often demanding and strict, it held a very special place in the affections of Gillespie girls, never to be forgotten through their successful careers and for the rest of their lives. The idea for the book came about as a response and reaction to the publication in 2016 by John MacLeod about the history of James Gillespie's school. It was called Faithful and Brave. John MacLeod was a product of the comprehensive Gillespies as it became in 1973. And though a very thorough account of the varied history of the school, it passed over very lightly the period when it was an exclusively girls' school of high standards, what I call the golden era of Gillespies. His publication was met with enthusiasm by the comprehensive sector, but did not go down at all well with those from the girls' era. The first irritation for ex-Gillespie girls, including myself, was the translation of the school motto Fidelis et Fortis as faithful and brave. Now, since time immemorial, we had always known it as faithful and strong. We did not like this arbitrary alteration. The second major insult was the way in which the era of the girls-only school was dealt with in the book. It gave little credit to the outstanding achievements of that period and no real sense of what was special about that golden era of Gillespie's history. It was in fact skimmed over rather briefly, apart from the mention of a few famous teachers and headmistresses of the time. I shall read you a quote from Box Hats Blue Stockings, which summarizes it perfectly. It's the quote, "Indeed, that girl's period was played down and not dwelt upon in any detail. Throughout John MacLeod's book, there is a distinct impression that this golden era has somehow detracted from the image of the school as it wishes to be presented today." Needless to say, this upset many ex-Gillespie girls, and through various channels, their annoyances and grievances were expressed vehemently about the way the girls' era had been so lightly dismissed. Many messages came via the Gillespie Trust, which keeps a database of ex-alumni. I contacted the Trust and asked if it would be willing to send out an email about the idea of a book about this golden era. The Trust agreed, and I had to compose a tactful email suggesting the idea for the book. It had to be carefully worded so as not to cause offense to those on the other side. The response was huge and overwhelming. Sorry, I've lost the place. I even had a contribution from a Gillespie boy, an ex-Gillespie boy, who had been caught in the transition from the girls' school to the comprehensive in 1973. At that moment, the book was born. I invited any interested ex-Gillespie girl to submit her memories and or photos. I had to be dictatorial about the length of the pieces and a few other necessary rules. I even heard from a few ladies who had been at school in the pre-war era of Muriel Spark and remembered her. There are two contributors from that period. One was Mary Morrison, who was at Gillespie's between 1940 and 53, sent 3 very interesting texts on school life at the time, in which she mentions a few famous teachers such as Blossom, Beanie, and the formidable headmistress, Miss Andrew. Mary has to this day a signed copy of Muriel's book, The Mandelbaum Gate, the photograph of which I have included in my book. The other one was Helen Heatley. Though a pupil herself in the 60s, she sent me 2 photographs of her mother's era in the 1930s. One is of her mother's class, all wearing their neat navy blue gym slips and white blouses. I used to love my gym slip with girdle. The other is of the school staff in around 1939, with the famous Miss Marr, the formidable Miss Marr, the maths teacher, seated on the ground at the front with her hair done in the earphones hairstyle, as was fashionable at the time. As well as the submissions, I had cards and letters from all over the world thanking me for undertaking this project. It was a challenging task to compile all the data and photographs and keep track of who sent what. To widen the scope of the book, I also included excerpts from the school magazine, a few priceless quotes from famous teachers, the school song, and some of my own poems about Gillespie's, including one about the infamous box hats. More of that later. When the book was finally complete, I held a very successful book launch in December 2019 at Riddles Court, to which contributors and other ex-Gillespie girls were invited. Those further afield and infirm were, of course, unable to attend. But many copies were sold that day, and thereafter orders came flooding in from all over the UK and the world. The NLS bookshop did a roaring trade until lockdown put paid to all that. The overwhelming response to the book has affirmed my belief that JGS for girls really was the golden era of Gillespie's, and though the present comprehensive enjoys a good reputation, the academic achievement and character building of the girls' age was special, unsurpassed, and difficult to replace. I received many glowing emails about the book and would like to quote you one in particular, which I received recently, which captures the enthusiasm and affection felt by these ex-Gillespie girls. It is from Dorothy Cairns, née Wilson, who was the school magazine editor in 1952. Here's the quote. "Just had to write, Norma, to say how much I enjoyed the book. I could not put it down till I had devoured it all to the very last drop of nostalgia. As a Gillespie girl from 1946 to 52, so much of the content rang so many bells in my memory and rekindled a pride in the old school, which I thought I had lost forever." James Gillespie's high school for girls in Muriel's day was probably not so different from my experience. I often pass by the old building on the links and still feel affection and nostalgia, full of memories, both good and bad, and recalling the locations of the various classrooms, the assembly halls, the science labs, and the art room way up in the attic. Some of Muriel's teachers, such as Alison Foster and Blossom, were still there in the 50s. Panama hats were worn in summer by primary girls. The dreaded box hats remained a vital part of the uniform. Green dresses in summer for the senior school, detentions, prefects, debating societies, teachers in black gowns, the scripture union, and so on. One custom which has sadly ceased was the taking of snuff by the staff and governors on Founders' Day. Muriel describes in her Curriculum Vitae, published in 1992, as it being an occasion the girls looked forward to, watching the platform parties squirm in discomfort while dissolving into uncontrollable sneezes. I love that. In keeping with this tradition, I acquired some snuff for the book launch, my book launch in 2019, and offered it to the Gillespie guests. Few took up the challenge. Muriel's favourite teacher at Gillespie's was Miss Christina Kay. She was cultured, interested in the arts, especially Renaissance painting, and clearly a very inspiring teacher who loved to travel, particularly to Italy. It is widely believed that Jean Brodie, in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, was based on her beloved teacher, Miss Kay, and there certainly were resemblances. However, there were also some important differences. Muriel's best friend at school was Frances Niven, and I will quote what she says about Miss Kay from her autobiography, Curriculum Vitae. Surely this is from Frances Niven, surely 75% is Miss Kay, dear Miss Kay, of the cropped iron grey hair with fringe and heavy black moustache, and undisputable admiration for Il Duce. Hers was the expression creme de la creme, hers the revealing extra lessons on art and music that stay with me yet. She it was who took us both, Frances Niven and myself, Muriel, part of the as yet unborn Brodie set, to see Pavlova's last performance at the Empire Theatre, and who took us for afternoon tea at McVitie's. On the same page of Curriculum Vitae, Muriel also quotes one of Miss Kay's former pupils, Elizabeth Vance, née Betty Murphy, about the resemblance or otherwise between Miss Kay and Jean Brodie, the heroine of her famous book. And here's the quote from Betty Murphy or Elizabeth Vance. I wonder if Miss Kay had one Italian parent, or perhaps a grandparent, as I remember her with dark eyes and an olive complexion, and such a great love of Italy and its art treasures, the paintings, the statues, the buildings. I have never seen the Colosseum, the catacombs, the Sistine Chapel, the Ponte Vecchio, or the Doge's Palace, but through Miss Kay, I feel I know them quite well. Interspersed with the Italian masters and the French impressionists of the 19th century and the Dutch school of Rembrandt's portraits in particular, we still had such an excellent grounding in the traditional 3 R's, useful even today: How did she manage it? With Miss K, I liked mental arithmetic and long division and multiplication sums and those spelling lists, and found grammar thoroughly enjoyable. On this, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie was published in 1961. It became her most famous novel and made the name of James Gillespie's High School for Girls famous, but perhaps for the wrong reasons. Though clearly based on her favourite teacher, the Jean Brodie of the book and film was a very different creature from the conservative and dignified Miss K. Miss K would not be found going off for weekends or to Crammond with the music teacher, Mr. Lowther, or having an ongoing dalliance with the art master, Teddy Lloyd. Miss Brodie had a very modern, liberal approach to sexual relations, and not at all in keeping with pre-war life in the social sphere of Edinburgh at that time in which Miss Brodie lived. She was a free spirit, more akin to the modern woman of today. On rereading the novel while writing this talk, it became vividly clear to me that this was a cry for freedom for women. Jean Brodie represents a free spirit, the independent woman exercising her own choices in life about sex, able to think for herself, to be treated as an equal person and not just as a weak creature dominated by men. Frequently in her novels, Muriel describes the foolishness of women, easily exploited by men, and how gullible they are when flattered by male attention, all in their desperate search for love. Even in 1961, when the novel was published, the described activities of Miss Brodie were considered quite shocking and advanced. In my university days in the 60s, we were comparatively conservative and much more inhibited in our habits. The age of sexual freedom had not fully arrived, but attitudes were clearly changing by the 1960s. The book is highly perceptive about the dangerous and ridiculous sexual fantasies of teenage girls. I do think that single-sex schools are a rich breeding ground for such fantasies. The descriptions in the imaginary diary of Miss Brodie, written by Sandy and Jenny, about Miss Brodie's love affairs are hilarious and a joy to read. It is just what little girls do in puberty, fantasize about love affairs. These diary entries are perhaps my favourite parts of the novel. Even in 1961, when it was first published, the book was considered quite risque. As a novel, it rollicks along in easy style and is by far her best novel, in my opinion. The only section which seems to me contrived and far-fetched is towards the end of the novel, where Miss Brodie encourages some of her Brodie set to embark on affairs with the art teacher, Mr. Lloyd. The book was later made into a film in 1969. The film was, in my view, very good and most enjoyable, but as a reflection of the book, it seriously distorted the Gillespie image. From then on, Gillespie's came to be seen by the public as a school for posh young ladies from Morningside who wore funny hats, had liberal ideas, and a free approach to sex. In the film Jean Brodie, played by Maggie Smith, Jean Brodie was a larger-than-life character who, as a teacher, was inspiring to listen to, but very short on instruction in the 3 R's. Was Miss K guilty of that? I somehow doubt it. Miss Andrew or her predecessor would have had something to say about any such slackness. I am sure of that. Miss Brodie was a nonconformist with a dangerous free spirit, which eventually led to her downfall. She had her favourites, the Brodie set and creme de la creme, as they came to be known. She was a far cry from Miss K in her lifestyle and morals. I imagine Miss K dressed tastefully but conservatively, as befits an Edinburgh lady who probably attended church on Sundays, but perhaps not. Was she also a secret nonconformist? It does seem strangely naive, however, that she idolized military figures of the period, such as Franco, Mussolini, etc. Later, a play based on the film was produced and appeared on the stage in London and Edinburgh. A special performance at the Lyceum was staged for Gillespie Associates, which I attended. The play was light-hearted and fun, but did not have the impact of the film. Muriel's other novels. I must confess to a limited enjoyment of her other novels. I have not read them all, only The Ballad of Peckham Rye and A Far Cry from Kensington, both about London, where she lived and worked for many years. The latter describes life in various London publishing companies while she was staying in bedsits and hostels for young women. Having myself lived in London for many years, there are echoes of my own young adult life there, though in North London and not in Kensington. The Ballad of Peckham Rye is a different kettle of fish about a Scotsman who has come to work for an island textile manufacturer. His unlikely job is to bridge the gap between industry and the arts. He is a manipulative character, and among other strange quirks, he claims to be in league with the devil. I assume it is a fantasy about the forces of good and evil present in human nature. I did not enjoy it. Muriel's first love was poetry, and from a very early age she wrote poetry for which she received various awards. I doubt if her poetry is read much nowadays, and I myself have only browsed through my copy of Going Up to Sotheby's. Many of the poems therein are narrative, serious, and quirky, but showing little of the humour which is so evident in her novels. One made me smile, which was Bluebell among the Sables. It is about Bluebell, one of Muriel's cats in real life, who leapt upon the luxurious, expensive sables worn by a visitor to the house and began to pound the fur vigorously with her claws. All has been overshadowed by the overwhelming success of Miss Jean Brodie. In later years, she wrote her autobiography, Curriculum Vitae, which I found very interesting, especially the early sections in which she describes her childhood in Brunsfield in the 20s and her school days at Gillespie's on the Links in the 30s. But none of her other works surpassed the prime of Miss Jean Brodie in popularity. Muriel received so many accolades for her writing. The greatest novelist of the 20th century, one of the greatest living writers in the English language, best woman novelist, and so on. Ian Rankin, when still a student at Edinburgh University, researched her work for his PhD. He described her as an extraordinary writer who was loved by her aficionados, but not lauded in her homeland as much as she should be. He met her only once, but saw her one August at the Edinburgh Book Festival. Muriel's writing style in her novels is definitely different and original. It is matter-of-fact with short sentences and short chapters. The books were not much more than 100 pages and became shorter as time went by. I read somewhere that in later life, when living in Tuscany with her friend Penelope Jardine, that she handwrote on single-sided paper in spiral-bound James Thin notebooks while tucked up in bed under blankets. Her quirky sense of humour and shrewd observation of the foibles of human nature gave her novels a distinctive style and flavour. She displayed these characteristics at school too, when she observed in her autobiography that more than paying attention to the lesson, she preferred studying the mannerisms and appearances of the teachers concerned, much like myself. I used to sit myself at the front of the class to observe Miss Foster, an English teacher whose lisle stockings were always twisted with the heel halfway up the leg, and who delivered spittle in abundance during her literary pronouncements. There were other worthy teachers I could have fun describing, all of whom would have been on the staff during Muriel's time, Miss Harris, Ali Anderson, etc. When all is said and done, what will Muriel Spark be remembered for? The prime of Miss Jean Brodie, of course. Rightly or wrongly, this is what captures the public imagination. Did Muriel have any idea, I wonder, that this novel would have such an impact on the public imagination and would earn her reputation as one of the most famous and successful writers of the 20th century? For me, I will always think of her as a pioneer in the cause of freedom and independence for women, as depicted very colourfully by Miss Jean Brodie. Muriel herself struggled to forge her own path for freedom and encountered difficulties and obstacles on the way. I'm going to finish my talk now by reading my poem about the infamous box hats which appear in my book. It is called The Mad Hatters. The Mad Hatters of the 50s. James Gillespie's High School for Girls, the creme de la creme, the Brodie girls, decked in uniform, maroon and gold, blazer and scarf with tie and shirt, green dress of summer or navy blue skirt. But a spectre loomed o'er our happy days, the hat, compelled to daily parade, a grotesque and monstrous piece of felt, a carbuncle upon each fair young pate, this all-consuming object of hate. With the flap tucked in like the horns of the deal, a foolish attachment devoid of appeal, ridiculous, devilish, foul creation, to banish it became our schoolgirl aim, to remove this object, our daily game. Our silly wee hats were targets of fun. The Harriet's boys would take it in turn to flick them high or toss them aside, never worn till they approached to school, where a hatless head was against the rule. I plotted and schemed for their final demise. I dreamed of revenge and funeral pyres, ritual burnings out there on the links, Gillespie hats in a glorious fire, the flames of hats reaching higher and higher. Box hats, however, continue to haunt. Their image persists to flaunt and taunt. Our Gillespie heads, though all grown up, still hold the memory of horrible hats, symbols of rigorous post-war rule, discipline, conformity, that was our school. Oh, where today do our box hats hide, those felt monstrosities we love to deride? Perhaps in a museum where laid to rest, or preserved in an attic or wooden chest, forever loathed but never forgotten. Does anyone have such an objet d'art? If so, we'll all stampede from afar to gather before it in humble homage, and gaze with masochistic delight upon this truly abominable sight. So that's my poem, and I will finish here. I do hope you've enjoyed my talk, and I'm only sorry that I have not been able to address you in person in the National Library of Scotland, where I would have a chance to meet some of you. Muriel Spark and Gillespie's are forever subjects firmly embedded in my memory. If any listener wishes to buy a copy of my book, please let Eric Dixon, the chairman of the MS Society, know, and he will provide you with my details.